Chapter 11. The Book Trial. "Waffle Castle," said Hawthorne, through a mouthful of cheese toasty. Jupiter had allowed Morrigan's new friend to visit her at the Hotel Deucalion on the condition that he help her study for the upcoming book trial. So far, they hadn't studied anything but the Deucalion itself. Hawthorne especially loved the smoking parlour, chocolate smoke this afternoon, to promote emotional well-being. The rain room, although he hadn't brought any wellies and his trousers were now soaked to his knees, and the theatre. Occasionally, not the theatre itself, but rather the dressing room backstage. The walls were lined with hanging costumes, and each one came with an accent and a funny walk that took ages to fade. Hawthorne was still skipping down the corridors half an hour after he'd taken off his Goldilocks costume. Now they sat at a corner table in the Hotel Deucalion's busy kitchen, which was full of steam and noise and chefs scrambling to fill orders. Not the best place to study for a test, in Morrigan's opinion, but Fenn wouldn't let them eat their lunch in the library, and Kedgeree had earlier announced that gravity had been suspended in the dining room until further notice. What's my knack? Morrigan had learned to dread this question. I don't know. Hawthorne nodded, chewing and swallowing loudly. "You don't have to tell me. Loads of candidates keep it a secret. Gives them the edge at the show trial." "Oh, it's not that," said Morrigan in a rush. "I don't think I have one." "You must do," he said, frowning as he chugged half a glass of milk. "Your patron can't put you in the trials unless you got a knack. It's the rules." A thought still niggled at the back of Morrigan's mind. Did her knack have something to do with the curse? She longed to ask Hawthorne's opinion, but she wasn't even supposed to mention the curse anymore. She'd promised Jupiter. "I think I'd know if I did." Morrigan picked at her sandwich. She'd lost her appetite. It'd been nice, she thought miserably, to have a friend for 5 minutes. Hawthorne would be better off being befriended by the dog-faced boy. "Suppose you would," Hawthorne shrugged. He polished off the last of his sandwich and opened up one of the textbooks Morrigan had borrowed from Jupiter's study. "Should we start with the Great War?" She looked up. "What? Or do you want to save that until we've covered the boring stuff?" Morrigan tried to keep her voice light to cover her surprise. "So you still want to be friends?" "What?" "Yeah, duh," he made a face. Morrigan felt her mouth twitch into a smile. Hawthorne was giving his friendship as if it meant nothing. He couldn't know that it meant everything. "We're supposed to be making valuable alliances and all that stuff they said at the Wondrous Welcome." Morrigan carried her empty plates to the sink, narrowly dodging the sous chef as he rushed past with a dish of steaming mussels. She felt duty-bound to make sure Hawthorne understood. "I doubt I'm a valuable alliance." "Who cares?" he said with a laugh, turning back to his book. Morrigan felt a surge of relief as she sat down again. "I think we should start with the Great War because there's loads of blood and guts. First question, how many heads got chopped off at the Battle of Fort Lamentation in the Highlands?" "No idea." He held up a finger. Trick question. The Highland clans don't chop off heads in battle. They chop off torsos, hang their enemies upside down and shake them until their guts fall out. "How nice," said Morrigan. The Free State really was a very different place from the Republic. Hawthorne rubbed his hands together, his eyes shining. He was only getting started. Next question. Which famous Skyforce pilot was roasted to a crisp by an enemy dragon during the Battle of the Black Cliffs? A bonus question. Which tribe of cliff-dwelling savages gobbled up his toasty remains when they fell out of the sky? A week later, Morrigan walked up the long driveway to Proudfoot House for the second time, once again fighting the urge to turn and run. The bare, black-trunked trees lining the drive seemed even more menacing this time. Against the pale sky, their spindly branches were like spiders looming above her, ready to pounce. "Nervous?" asked Jupiter. Morrigan only answered with a raised eyebrow. "Right, of course you are. You should be nervous. It's a nervous sort of day." "Thanks. That makes me feel loads better." "Really?" "No." Jupiter laughed, looking up at the patches of grey sky through the tree branches. "Well, I meant it in a good way. Your life is about to change, Morrigan. In a couple of hours, you'll be one step closer to getting your little gold pin. And when that happens, the world will open up to you." Morrigan wanted to take heart from his confidence. She really did. She wanted desperately to feel that she could do this. Even if a fraction of Jupiter's belief in her was justified, she would have colonised the moon and cured every disease in the realm by summertime. But it was no good, because she still hadn't figured out whether or not he was a madman. The written part's the hardest, said Jupiter. 3 unseen questions. Total silence, nothing but a pencil, paper and a desk. Just take your time, Mog, and answer honestly. You mean correctly? Morrigan asked, confused. Jupiter didn't seem to hear her. Then there's the oral component, but it's nothing to worry about, just a little quiz. More of a conversation, really. Again, take your time. Don't afraid to make them wait. The elders want to see what you're like. Just be your charming self and you'll be fine. Morrigan wanted to ask what charming self he was talking about and whether he would perhaps confused her with some other Morrigan crow he'd met somewhere, but it was too late. They'd reached Proudfoot House and patrons weren't allowed into the examination hall. She was on her own. Good luck, Mog, Jupiter said, punching her lightly in the arm. Morrigan joined the stream of candidates climbing the marble steps. Her feet felt leaden. Go forth and conquer. The examination hall was the biggest room Morrigan had ever been in, filled with row after row of rectangular desks and straight-backed wooden chairs. Hundreds of candidates filed in, one after another, and sat silently as Wanderer Society officials handed out booklets and pencils. Morrigan craned her neck, trying to spot Hawthorne, but no luck. The desks were allocated alphabetically, and she supposed he was all the way at the back in the S section somewhere. She gave up and read the front of the booklet. Wanderer Society Entry Examination Book Trial. Spring of 1, Third Age of the Aristocrats. Candidate Morrigan Odell Crow. Patron Captain Jupiter Amantius North. When every child had the exam paper, a society official at the front of the hall sounded a glass chime. With a chorus of rustling, they opened their booklets. Morrigan took a deep breath and turned to the first page. It was blank, as was the second page, and the third. She flipped through the rest of the booklet and found that there were no questions anywhere. She raised her hand and tried to catch the eye of the official to tell him there'd been a mistake, that she'd been given a blank exam, but the woman at the front was oblivious. Morrigan looked at the first page again. Words appeared. You're not from here. Why do you even want to join the Wanderer Society? Morrigan glanced around to see if any of the other candidates' booklets had grown a brain and started to asking impertinent questions. If they had, nobody seemed surprised. Perhaps their patrons had warned them. She remembered what Jupiter had said to her. Just take your time, Mog, and answer honestly. With a sigh, Morrigan picked up her pencil and began. Because I want to be an important and useful member of Before she'd finished writing it, the sentence was scratched out by some unseen pen. She gasped. Nonsense, said the book. Why do you really want to be in the Wanderer Society? Morrigan chewed on her lip. Because I want a little golden W pin. The words scratched themselves out again. A corner of the page began to blacken and curl in on itself. Nope, said the book. A tiny tendril of smoke coiled up from the smouldering edges of the page. Morrigan tried stamping it out with her hand, but it wouldn't stop. She looked around frantically for a glass of water or an adult to help her, but none of the officials seemed disturbed. In fact, they seemed to be tranquilly ignoring the fact that not only Morrigan's, but several other candidates' exam booklets were in various stages of combustion. One boy's paper burst into flames and burnt out completely, leaving nothing but a pile of ash on his desk. An official tapped him on the shoulder and motioned for him to leave. The boy slumped out of the hall. Honest answers, thought Morrigan quickly, and grabbed her pencil again. Because I want people to like me. The paper paused in its journey to self-destruction. It hovered in a flickering, smouldering state that usually preceded the whoosh of flames. Go on, said the book. Her hand shook a little. I want to belong somewhere. More, the book prompted her. She took a deep breath, thought of the conversation she'd had with Jupiter the day after Morningtide and wrote, I want brothers and sisters who will stand by me forever, no matter what. The damage began to slowly reverse itself, the clean white paper creeping back and reclaiming its burnt corners. Relieved, Morrigan loosened her death grip on the pencil a little. After a moment, the second question appeared. What is your biggest fear? Morrigan didn't even have time to think about that one. Total no-brainer. The dolphins will learn to walk on land and shoot acid out of their blowholes. The words violently scratched themselves out and the paper once again began to char. Nearby, a girl shrieked as her own booklet conflagrated. What's that word? Conflagrated. She was sent out of the examination hall with singed eyebrows. Morrigan racked her brain as the corners of her booklet turned to ash. She told the truth. Land-dwelling acid dolphins were her biggest fear. They always had been her biggest fear, except... well, no. She'd always said they were her biggest fear, probably because her biggest fear, the real one, was too awful to talk about. She bit her lip and committed a new answer to the page. Death. The book continued to smoulder. Death, she wrote again. Death, it's obviously death. And then a brave brainwave. The hunt of smoke and shadow. But the book kept burning. Morrigan grabbed it, wincing as it scorched her fingers, and wrote in the last tiny patch of white space left, being forgotten. The book unburnt a little. Go on, it said. That nobody will remember me, that my family won't remember me because... Morrigan paused, her pencil hovering above the smoky page. Because they'd rather forget that I ever existed. The book smoothed and whitened, uncurling its pages until they were once again pristine. Morrigan waited patiently for her third and final question. She glanced around the room and saw that roughly a quarter of the desks were now empty, but for little piles of ashes. And how, asked the book, will you ensure that people remember you? Morrigan thought for a long time. She leaned back in her chair and watched silently as small fires broke out all around her and a few dozen more candidates were made to leave the hall. Finally, she wrote the most honest answer she could think of. I don't know. And after a moment's hesitation, she added one more word. Yet. In an instant, all three questions and answers disappeared from the pages and were replaced by a single word in large green letters. Pass. Morrigan paced back and forth in an antechamber of Proudfoot House. Around a third of the candidates had failed the written examination. The rest were put into smaller groups and shepherded into rooms to await the next part of the book trial. In Morrigan's group, there was a boy hugging his knees to his chest and rocking back and forth, an energetic pair of twins firing questions to each other and high-fiving aggressively, and a girl slumped on a chair with her arms folded. Morrigan recognised her. It was the friend of Noelle's from the Wondrous Welcome, the one who couldn't stop laughing at how hilarious Noelle wasn't. Her black hair was twisted into a thick braided knot at the back of her head. She watched the twins through hooded up brown eyes. What are the three major exports of Upper Zealand? Shouted one of the twins. Jade, dragon scales and wool, shouted the other. They high-fived. Noelle's friend scowled. A woman with a clipboard entered the room, her heels click-clacking on the wooden floor as she bustled over to the group of children. Fitzwilliam? Francis John Fitzwilliam? She read from her list. The boy in the corner looked up at her and swallowed. Sweat beaded on his brow. He rose unsteadily to his feet and followed her out of the room, tapping his fingers on his thighs and staring at the ground. Who was the first Nevermoorian to walk on the moon? Shouted one of the twins. Lieutenant General Elizabeth von Keeling, shouted the other. They high-fived. The girl with the braid breathed fiercely through her nose. Morrigan closed her eyes and concentrated on naming the 27 boroughs of Nevermoor. Old Town, she whispered to herself. Wick, Bloxham, Metagaloos, Macquarie. She could do this. She was prepared. She'd read every history and geography book she could get her hands on, and she'd made Kedgeree quiz her over and over the night before. She might not know much about the exports of Upper Zealand, wherever that was, but she felt sure she knew enough now about Nevermoor and the Free State to get through the next trial. Delphia, continued Morrigan, looking up at the ceiling, Groves and Alden, Deering, Highwall. They're not going to ask about the boroughs, said Noelle's friend. Morrigan was surprised to hear her voice. It was lower, huskier than she expected. At the Wondrous Welcome, she'd sounded like a giddy hyena. Every idiot knows that the boroughs are called. We learnt that in nursery school, for goodness sake. Morrigan ignored her. Pocock, Farnham and Barnes, Rhodes Village, Tenterfield. Are you deaf or stupid? Asked the girl. Where do the time zones of the unnamed realm intersect? Shouted one of the twins. Centre of Z Forest, fifth pocket of the Free State, shouted the other. They high-fived. Morrigan squeezed her eyes shut and resumed pacing. Blackstock, Bellamy... She was stopped by a soft wall of person. She opened her eyes in surprise and found the woman with the clipboard looking down at her. Crow? Morrigan nodded gravely, straightened her dress and shoulders and followed the woman to the interview hall. Halfway there, she glanced back and saw Noelle's friend talking to the twins. You're going to fail, she was saying to them in a husky voice. You're completely unprepared. You're not going to remember a single thing. You'll never get into the society. You might as well just go home now. Morrigan looked up at the woman with the clipboard to see if she could go back and say something, but the woman's face was blank and uninterested, as though she hadn't heard a word. Go on, she said to Morrigan, giving her a little push. They're waiting for you. Stand on the cross. The High Council of Elders sat at the table in the centre of an empty hall. As Morrigan approached, they murmured amongst themselves, taking sips of water and shuffling through papers. Miss Crow, said the spindly, wispy-haired Elder Quinn, adjusting her spectacles. Who is the leader of the Free State? Prime Minister Gideon Steed. Incorrect. The leaders of the Free State are innovation, industry, and thirst for knowledge. Morrigan's stomach dropped as though she'd missed a step on a staircase. In that instant, she knew she was not prepared for the sort of interview the elders had decided to give. Any scrap of confidence she might have felt earlier had now abandoned her, and she felt suddenly seized by fear. Who is Gideon Steed? Asked the bull, Elder Aleoth Saga. Morrigan faltered. He's the Prime Minister, isn't he? Incorrect, boomed Elder Saga. Prime Minister Gideon Steed is democratically elected steward of the Free State. A sentry has been appointed by the people to protect the values, standards and liberties that we hold dear. But he is the Prime Minister, Morrigan insisted. This wasn't fair. She'd answered the question correctly. You just said so yourself. The elders ignored her protest. How does one tell incendiary botanical from a tree that has merely been set on fire? Asked Elder Helix Wong. She knew this one. The flames of an incendiary botanical never produce smoke. Incorrect, said Elder Wong. Incendiary botanicals are extinct. Any tree that appears to be an incendiary botanical is a tree that merely has been set on fire and should be extinguished immediately. Morrigan groaned inwardly. She should have seen that one coming. Of course fire blossom trees were extinct. Jupiter had told her that. Plus, she'd read in a vegetal history of Nevermoor that nobody had seen a fire blossom burning in over 100 years. She felt a twinge of annoyance at the trick question. How old is the great city of Nevermoor? Asked Elder Quinn. Nevermoor was founded 1,891 years ago during the Second Avian Age. Incorrect. Nevermoor is as ancient as the stars, as new as powder snow, and as mighty as thunder. Well, this is impossible. How am I supposed to... When did the Courage Square massacre occur? Asked Elder Quinn. Morrigan started to answer, Winter of 9, Age of the East Winds, when something came into her mind. She stopped and took a moment to let her brain form the answer before her mouth did. The elders watched her expectantly. Don't be afraid to make them wait. The Courage Square massacre, she began haltingly, occurred on a dark day. The elder said nothing. One of the darkest in Nevermoor's history, continued Morrigan. A day when... She paused while her brain scrambled for words. A day when fiendishness triumphed over goodness. A day when evil took hold of Nevermoor and shook it until its guts fell out. The elders continued to stare. Morrigan's heart hammered in her ears. What more did they want? A day never to be repeated, she said finally. That was it. She had no more nonsense left in her. Elder Quinn smiled. It was a tiny smile, but Morrigan saw it. It was like a very small flower in a bed of hopeless weeds. The hunched little elder looked as though she might be about to ask a follow-up question, and Morrigan felt suddenly terrified. She didn't actually know very much about the Courage Square massacre. She and Hawthorne had stopped for a tea break halfway through that chapter of the Encyclopedia of Nevermorian Barbarism and forgotten to get back to it. Morrigan held her breath, hoping she'd done enough. Elder Quinn looked to her colleagues and nodded curtly and returned to their papers. Thank you, Miss Crow, You may go. Morrigan emerged, blinking into the sunshine. She walked in a daze down the steps of Proudfoot House to where Jupiter stood waiting. How was it? Weird. Obviously. He shrugged as if she should have realised the weirdness was standard procedure for the Wanderer Society. Your mate with the toads came out earlier, by the way. Said to tell you he got through to the next trial and that you'd better get through too, or else. Then he and Nan had to rush off to the Dragon Rider training session, and I had to pretend not to be completely jealous of an 11-year-old boy who gets to ride dragons. So, did you get through? He asked casually. Morrigan held up the letter she'd been given, still not quite believing it herself. Congratulations, candidate, Jupiter read aloud. You have proven your sincerity, reasoning and quick thinking and may proceed to the next round of the trials for Unit 919. The chase trial will take place at noon on the last Saturday in summer of 1. Details to follow. I told you! Didn't I tell you you'd do it? Well done, Mog, I'm chuffed. Morrigan wasn't paying attention. She'd spotted the high five twins leaving Proudfoot House. They ran wailing to their patron. We can't do it, sobbed the first twin. We're completely unprepared. We don't remember a single thing. Somewhere, in amongst the relief she felt at her own success, Morrigan felt sorry for the twins. That awful girl, Noelle's friend, had obviously got inside their heads and knocked their confidence. She wanted to say something, to give them some sort of hint about what the elders wanted, but Jupiter was already steering her away from Proudfoot House. The sun had come out, making the bare black branches of the tree-lined drive seem somehow less sinister than before. She lifted her face, letting it warm her, and absently reached out to touch one of the dead trees as she and Jupiter strode down the drive. A flash of searing heat and tiny purple sparks met her fingertips, and she snatched back her hand. Ow! What? Jupiter stopped short. What's wrong? That tree just burnt me. He stared at her for a moment and then chuckled. Very funny, Mog. I told you, fire blossoms are extinct. Jupiter carried on ahead of her, and Morrigan examined her unblemished fingers. She reached out cautiously to touch the tree again. Nothing happened. She shook her head, giving a confused little laugh. Apparently, her imagination did have a bit of nonsense left in it.